Hello, and welcome to Boring Stories for Sleep. Tonight, our story is about a machine that was the lifeblood of a nation. We are going back to the England of 1963, to a time of profound social change, a world caught between the old and the new. And through this world, every night, like clockwork, ran the travelling post office train. It was more than just a train. It was a symbol of the nation's routine, a vessel of communication and commerce, carrying millions of pounds in cash and correspondence from one end of the country to the other in a steady, reliable rhythm. Our story is about what happens when that symbol of national routine is brought to a sudden, calculated, and audacious halt. It is the story of a crime so bold and so brilliantly simple in its execution that it would capture the imagination of the public and become a permanent fixture in the annals of criminal history. You wait, the engine idling, a low rumble in the stillness. The door is pulled open, and silent, masked figures begin to swarm into the small, confined space. You are dazed, your head throbbing with a dull ache. The masked figures are in control. They have a problem. They are unable to operate this modern, complex locomotive. They need you. An order is given. You are to drive the train forward, just a short distance. Your hands move over the familiar controls, but the actions feel distant, disconnected, as if you are watching someone else perform them. There is no shouting, just a swift, purposeful intrusion. Below, in the darkness, the rest of the gang is waiting. Your part in this drama is now largely over. You and your CEO driver are taken from the cab and led to the side of the embankment, silent, disoriented captives. Before you can fully process what is happening, there is a sudden, heavy pressure, a dull impact behind your ear. The green glow of the instrument panel dissolves into a swarm of bright, fleeting stars. For a moment, there is only a muffled silence, a sense of the world tilting on its axis. You expect him back in a few minutes with an explanation. We are going to explore the Great Train Robbery. There is no need to follow every detail of the plot. The methodical, unhurried pace of the work is unnerving. The familiar rhythm of your journey has been broken, replaced by the quiet, disciplined rhythm of a crime in progress. Simply allow the steady, unhurried rhythm of the story, like the gentle rocking of a train car on a long night's journey, to guide you softly towards rest. So, I invite you now to settle in. Let the day's concerns begin to soften and recede. You are Jack Mills, the driver of the travelling post office train, the Up Special, on its overnight run from Glasgow to London. The cab of your diesel-electric locomotive is a small, familiar world. The air is thick with the scent of hot oil, and the instrument panel casts a steady, green glow in the darkness. Through the window, the quiet English countryside rushes by, a blur of sleeping fields and dark woods. This is your routine, a job you have done for years. It is a life measured by the steady, powerful rhythm of the rails. Imagine yourself now. It is the early morning of August 8th, 1963. Up ahead, in the darkness, a signal light shines yellow, a warning to slow. Then it turns to red, a stop signal. It is unusual for this line to be halted, but not unheard of. It is simply a problem to be dealt with. You bring the heavy, 12-carriage train to a slow, grinding halt, the brakes hissing in the PRE dawn quiet. Instead, the quiet of the cab is broken. As is protocol, your CEO driver, David Whitby, climbs down from the cab with a heavy lantern to use the trackside telephone to find out the cause of the delay. But he does not return. When your senses return, your world has changed. You guide the train slowly forward until you reach the designated spot, Bradego Railway Bridge. From there, you can only watch as a human chain of dark figures begins to form, passing mailbags from the high-value carriage down to a waiting truck below. The quiet, disciplined efficiency on display at Bradego Bridge was not an accident. It was the result of months of meticulous planning, all orchestrated by one man, a figure who stood at the center of the intricate web of the crime. By trade, he was an antiques dealer, a cover that allowed him to move in different social circles and lend him an air of sophistication. He viewed himself not as a thug, but as a planner, a man whose currency was information and whose talent was logistics. His criminal career had been a steady progression of increasingly ambitious, non-violent thefts, and he was always searching for what criminals of his day called the big one, a score so significant it would become a legend. To understand the Great Train Robbery, we must first understand its architect, Bruce Reynolds. The first and most important task was to find a secure and discreet base of operations. The search led them to Leatherslade Farm, a remote and dilapidated farmhouse in Oxfordshire. It was perfect, isolated enough to avoid suspicion, yet close enough to the proposed site of the robbery. But while the newspapers were printing sensational headlines, the police were faced with a frustrating and profound silence. Slipper was a methodical, old-school detective, a man known for his quiet tenacity. The trail was cold. A local Buckinghamshire herdsman had taken note of the unusual activity at the remote and supposedly vacant Leatherslade farm. He had seen vehicles coming and going at odd hours and noticed that the windows had been blacked out. After hearing the news of the nearby train robbery, he made a simple phone call to the local police. For days, the investigation seemed to be at a standstill. The robbers had executed a near-perfect getaway. The place had been left in a hurry. They found discarded food, empty bottles, and more than 160 mailbags from the train, confirming their suspicions. The robbers had hidden here, counting their money and waiting for the initial heat of the investigation to die down. He and his team began the painstaking work of piecing together the crime. They interviewed the train crew, scoured the area for evidence, and began the process of tracing the stolen vehicles. The gang had vanished as if into thin air, leaving behind a traumatized train crew, a ransacked mail carriage, and very few clues. In their days of hiding, bored and flush with cash, the men had passed the time by playing a board game. Left out on a table was a Monopoly set, the game pieces and cards scattered about. The gang purchased it, and it became their quiet headquarters. They had been told to wipe down every surface for fingerprints before they left, a rule they had apparently followed meticulously. With their fine powders and brushes, they began the slow, delicate work of searching for prints. The quiet, patient work of the forensic scientists, analyzing the smudges left behind during a casual game, had given Jack Slipper and his team the key they needed. The police now had the names of several known London criminals. The ghosts of the Great Train Robbery now had identities. The manhunt could begin in earnest, and they found them. The robbers' fingerprints were all over the Monopoly board, the tiny plastic houses and hotels, the chance and community chest cards, and even, famously, on a bottle of ketchup that had been used during the game. But in their overconfidence, they had forgotten about the board game. Reynolds was not a typical criminal of the era. He was known for his sharp suits, his quiet charisma, and an intellectual approach to his illicit profession. They learned the train's exact schedule, the layout of the carriages. Bruce Reynolds, the architect of the crime, had transformed a piece of insider information into a complex, living operation. All that was left was for the up special to begin its final, fateful journey into their carefully laid trap, and which coach the second one behind the engine held the high-value packages. The plan to stop the train was brutally simple. The gang would tamper with the trackside signal lights, covering the green light and powering the red light with a simple 6-volt battery. It was a low-tech solution to a high-tech problem, designed to bring the powerful machine to a halt without causing a catastrophic derailment. He began to gather a crew of trusted associates from the London underworld, each man a specialist in his own right. The gang, which would eventually number more than 15 men, was a carefully curated collection of skills. There was Gordon Goody, a quiet and imposing organizer. There was Buster Edwards, a club owner and experienced safecracker. And there were the experts in getaway driving, communications, and sheer manpower. The idea for the robbery did not come in a flash of inspiration, but as a piece of quiet information. An informant, a post office insider, provided the seed of the plan. Knowledge of the massive, untraceable sums of old banknotes that were regularly transported from Glasgow to London for incineration aboard the travelling post office train. For Reynolds, this was not just a target. It was a complex logistical puzzle to be solved. His first step was to assemble a team. He knew he could not execute a plan of this scale alone. One of the key recruits was a man named Ronnie Biggs. Biggs himself was not a master planner, but he possessed a crucial contact, a retired train driver who could, in theory, be persuaded to help them move the locomotive from the rigged signal to the bridge. With his team in place, Reynolds began the slow, methodical work of planning the operation in painstaking detail. The details of the crime itself were worked out with similar precision. The team was in place, the farm was prepared, and the plan had been rehearsed down to the smallest detail. As dawn broke over the quiet Buckinghamshire countryside on August 8th, the scale of the crime became clear, and a national sensation was born. The investigation was placed in the hands of the flying squad from Scotland Yard, a team of elite detectives, and was led by Detective Chief Superintendent Jack Slipper. But the gang had been careful. The breakthrough, when it came, was not the result of a high-speed chase or a brilliant deduction. It came from a quiet tip-off. When Jack Slipper and his team arrived at the now abandoned farmhouse, They knew instantly they had found the robber's lair. And it was inside this dusty, abandoned farmhouse that the investigators found the gang's fatal, almost comical mistake. In their haste to leave the farm, the gang had made a critical error. The forensic team from Scotland Yard descended on the farmhouse. The greatest robbery in a generation, a crime of immense planning and audacity, was ultimately unraveled by a forgotten board game. With names and faces to work with, the nature of the investigation changed entirely. It was no longer a search for ghosts, but a hunt for known men. Armed with the fingerprint evidence from the Monopoly board, Jack Slipper and the flying squad began the slow, methodical work of tracking down and arresting the members of the gang. Over the following months, most of the robbers were captured. The subsequent trials resulted in exceptionally long prison sentences. Many of the key members were sentenced to 30 years, a term that was seen by some as disproportionately harsh. But the story was far from over. For some of the robbers, their capture was only the beginning of another chapter. In the years that followed, the investigation prompted major reforms in forensic science, police communications, and the organization of law enforcement in the United Kingdom. In 1965, 2 years after the robbery, one of its most famous members, Ronnie Biggs, executed a daring escape from Wandsworth Prison. It is a tale of a brilliantly planned crime, undone by the simplest of human errors. It is a story of men who sought a single, life-changing score, only to have their lives defined by decades of imprisonment or exile. There are no sirens, no need to look over your shoulder. All that remains is the stillness and the gentle invitation to sleep. The frantic energy of the past has settled into a calm and distant memory. The money is long gone, the story is told, and the long journey is at its end. And it is the story of how a real-life crime, an act of theft and violence, slowly transformed into a modern myth. Using a rope ladder, he scaled the prison wall and dropped into a waiting furniture van. The excitement and the notoriety of that August night in 1963 have long since faded, leaving behind only the quiet facts of history. And Biggs soon had a son with his Brazilian girlfriend. The robbers were often romanticized, transformed in the public imagination from criminals into working-class anti-heroes who had pulled off a daring feat against the establishment. The crime occurred at a time of significant social change in Britain, and for many, the robbery was seen as a kind of rebellion, a story of audacious underdogs who had outsmarted a rigid and powerful system. This legend was cemented in countless books, films, and songs. He was safe. For decades, he lived as an open fugitive, a curious celebrity who would host parties for tourists, always with the quiet knowledge that he could never go home. His life was not one of glamorous freedom, but a long, slow exile, a gilded cage in a foreign land. This act marked the beginning of one of the most famous fugitive stories of the 20th century. Biggs fled to Paris, where he underwent plastic surgery to alter his appearance. From there, he moved his family to Australia, where he lived quietly for several years. But when the net of law enforcement began to close in on him there, he fled again, this time to Brazil. In Rio de Janeiro, he found a loophole. Brazilian law at the time did not permit the extradition of a parent of a Brazilian child. The Great Train Robbery, and the long, public manhunt for its participants, became deeply embedded in British popular culture. The crime also left a more practical legacy. The sheer scale of the robbery and the initial success of the gang's getaway exposed significant weaknesses in British police methods. The story of the Great Train Robbery is a story of contrasts, but the long chase is over now. The fugitives have grown old. The story has found its final chapters. Here, in the stillness of your room, the world is at peace. Let the legend fade into the quiet of the night. Sleep now,